You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swaby. Listen to conversations with award-winning filmmakers, directors from the golden age of television, and creatives from the indie film community who continue to inspire the next generation of filmmakers. And now, over to your host, Damian Swaby.
Today on Filmmaking Conversations, I speak to Jennifer Fischer, the visionary executive director of Journeys in Film. Jennifer combines her deep passion for film with a commitment to education, guiding an organization at the forefront of using film to enlighten the most visually literate generation ever. We'll uncover the roots of Journeys in Film, and Jennifer will share insights on overcoming teaching challenges, fostering global empathy through film, and the transformative power of cinematic storytelling in education. Highlighting the future ambitions of Journeys in Film, including new themes and collaborations like Matter of Mind, My Parkinson's. Jennifer also gives us a peek into her personal narrative, shaping her leadership and drive. For those enchanted by the fusion of cinema and education and looking to make a difference, this episode promises inspiration, guidance, and a glimpse of the profound impacts of Journeys in Film. Get ready for another captivating conversation with me, Damian Swaby, but this time with Jennifer Fischer, a leader who's bringing change one film at a time. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been a long time in the making since I wanted to speak to you, so I'm glad that you're finally here and we can do this podcast.
Thank you.
So your organization and everything is brilliant. You know, from what I've seen online, I really think it's an important organization as well. So could you share with us the inception story of Journeys in Film and what sparked the creation of this organization?
Sure. I've been with Journeys in Film for about 2 years, but it was started just over 20 years ago by Joanne Ash, who really saw the potential of what film could be in classrooms if the right materials were made for it. And what was really important to her was global education, really allowing students around the world to learn about one another through film. So at our inception and our root is global education, but our work has evolved since then. We certainly primarily have films that are global in nature, but we also have films like Just Mercy and Summer of Soul in our library that for students in the US really are student specific, are US specific to those students' experiences or perhaps things of the history of their nation, while also staying true to our commitment to global learning through film. So that's really was the goal, was seeing that storytelling and films had a unique potential to build empathy and understanding in students of people around the world and what they are experiencing. So that was really at the root of the organization's founding, was that ability of film in particular to build empathy and understanding across cultures.
Amazing. 20 years ago. Wow. What type of building blocks were put in place for an organization like this 20 years ago? Because I assumed the company wasn't that old.
No, a lot of people don't realize how long we've been around. I think the building blocks were really not only selecting films well, choosing well the films that we have in our library, films that would be of value to educators, but also the way that we create those materials. So we work with educators to create those materials. There was some talk of professors, and sometimes there were those experts, they weigh in, but we really found for the materials to be useful for teachers, they needed to be written by either active classroom teachers or people who had been in the classroom. So they really were getting something that they could use. So often there's a disconnect. Sometimes, people that are experts in an area may not be the best people to translate that to a classroom for a teacher. So really having teachers be actively involved in that in partnership with experts where needed is what I think sets our materials apart, because it really is, they've been created for teachers by teachers. We also always keep our materials free for educators. So teachers are not having to pay for the materials. That's really important. We know that their budgets are tight. So that's important. That's been at the root of our work always. And in recent years too, we've become mindful about adding in sensitivity readers when needed, about the experience and of the writers matching the stories that are told. So really trying to make sure the materials feel authentic and relevant and useful for the classroom.
Gosh. So, how does Journeys in Film approach in integrating film into educational curricula to address the needs of what you described as the most visually literate generation in history?
Well, we try to think about looking at a film through multiple lenses. How would a teacher use this in the classroom? So, for instance, with Hidden Figures, there's a wide range of materials available. We have things about civil rights, because, of course, that's a very important part of the film. But we also have math lessons. We also have a segment on inspiring women to be involved in STEM, because that's another piece of that film. We also have things about the Cold War, so putting the space race in perspective. So when we look at a film, we're not just using one lens. We want to make sure there's lots of different entry points to that film, because we don't know which one will spark that student's interest or what kind of teacher will want to bring that film into their classroom. So we're always looking at multiple ways to use a film in the classroom, seeing it through various lenses and not just one lens, but multiple lenses. Also, we like to think about representation, what students might not be seeing themselves on film in mainstream media, and how can our library help with that? And that's an area we're really seeking to grow in right now as well, as the world around us shifts and as, the students that teachers are teaching shifts. So we really want students to be able to not only learn about other cultures, but maybe see themselves reflected in films in ways that they're not seeing perhaps in mainstream media, and really think about the ways that the films that we create, that we select, the curate, and the materials we can create really support teachers and students, and those connections and those engagements and that thoughtfulness, getting them to think about issues, getting them to have powerful discussions in their classroom or maybe with each other as students or back when they get home. There's a variety of ways that the films can be used, and we try to think that way as we work on a project.
Has there been an occasion when a teacher has got in touch with Journeys in Film and said, "We have had a powerful discussion after the students have been educated by what you've provided"?
Yeah, we get those feedback. We've actively sought that out in the past, but we get emails, from time to time that say, "Hey, we reused this. It was great." Not a ton, because teachers are very busy, but when we're at events and when I'm online with teachers, we're hearing that. We're hearing, "This really made a difference in my classroom. I used this in X way. I really appreciated, Y," whatever it is that the teachers are resonating with or that resonated with their students. One film that comes to mind is Children of Heaven, which is an Iranian film. And that's one of the older ones in our library. So it was one of the earlier ones. And really, the representation and understanding of Iran in the US is, I would say, not very high. It's not a country that most people learn a lot about. What they usually learn is very one-dimensional. But this film is just a beautiful film about two siblings in Iran. And it doesn't get into the government, the politics. It just shows their lives and it shows their story. And it's a narrative film, which I think a lot of people assume most of our resources will be for documentary films, but we have both narrative and documentary. And we heard from teachers that it really impacted students to be like, "Oh, that Iranian student in a hijab, she's very much like me. I could relate to her. I can see the similarities. I can see the differences too." So those kind of things are powerful, because we have a world in which we're often being told the things that separate us, that divide us, the reasons we should be at odds with each other. And I think when students see the stories of other youth around the world and can see those differences and those similarities, it really helps them counter maybe some of the mainstream noise that is preaching that divisiveness.
Amazing. With such a diverse range of subjects, how does Journeys in Film select the feature films and documentaries it uses? What criteria must these films meet?
Well, of course, there's a certain professionalism in the film. Of course, it needs to be clear that it was professionally made, that it was made to meet the standards that you would want in a film. Also, appropriateness to the classroom. There are some films that are really powerful, but we know it's going to be tough for a teacher to use it if there's language, if there's nudity, things like that, that in a high school setting even would be hard. That's obviously a criteria. A lot of it is the films that reach out to us. We go after films, but most of the time the films are coming to us and people are saying, hey, we think that there's an educational component to this film. Can you work with us? We do some of that outreach ourselves, but a lot of times it's just our reputation and people coming to us. So it's the opportunities that we get from films. That's a part of it for sure. And then also looking at the landscape of representation that's needed. So we have some key growth areas that we're looking at in the future, but really, we have Korean film, the Iranian film. We're trying to look at, we have a film from China. Are we offering different things that are going to meet different needs and different classroom goals? So we want to make sure there's that richness in the library as well.
So could you walk us through the process of developing your multidisciplinary lesson plans? How do you measure or observe their impact on students' understanding of global issues?
Well, do you mean the process of creating them or measuring what students get from them?
Both.
Well, so when we're creating it, we work with the filmmaker. So this is important since a lot of people listening might be filmmakers. If the filmmakers have certain educational or impact goals, we want to make sure we're working with them. If a film already has an impact campaign, we want to make sure that we are collaborating with that impact campaign. So, for instance, we did a film, Unzipped, an autopsy of American inequality, last year. And that's a film about the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis. And it looks at housing issues in Venice specifically. And so they had a very specific impact campaign and a great impact hub. So we wanted to make sure that our materials were useful for students, absolutely, like high school teachers that would be using this in the classroom, but that they also connected with their impact campaign. So that's one thing that's really important. If a film has certain goals, we're there to support that film in those goals. But then, of course, we also look at what educators are saying to us. What are they needing? What resources would they like? And so that's the balance that we take. And so when we're looking at a film, we have both of those hats on, going, what would the filmmaker like with these? What are their goals and how can we support their goals? And what do we know that teachers need and how can we meet those teacher needs? So something we've been doing is scaling back or scaling down our resources in recent years because teachers are under so much pressure and they have more and more testing pressure. A fallout of the pandemic, unfortunately, has been this idea that students are behind, which is a term I really dislike because we create the rules about what students should learn when. So there really should be no behind and everybody learns differently. So I really don't like that idea, but it is affecting what teachers can do and the time that teachers have. So while if you look at our library, our earlier films might have 11 lessons and they meet core standards. We always do that. We meet the standards that the teachers are expected to teach. And the whole guide is like 185 pages. For Summer of Soul, we have 6 lessons. Tightening it up, making it a little more concise because we know teachers don't have as much time, unfortunately. A teacher might wish that they could really get into the history of Harlem with their students and choices about policy and government spending, but we know they're not going to have as much time as maybe when we started teachers were having. So because of all these pressures on testing, so we're adapting our materials to meet that and say, okay, here's 6 lessons. The whole guide's much shorter so that teachers can still use the materials, but in a way that's more effective to how they're being pushed to teach now. We also have started creating learning guides. So these are discussion guides with extension activities. Again, for a teacher that's not going to have as much time, but they want to be able to bring something into their classroom. Also, these guides are really useful for community groups, libraries, after school programs, homeschooling. Homeschooling has risen a ton in the last 5 years and a much more wider range of types of families are homeschooling than traditionally was the case. And so we wanted to create materials that could be accessible for homeschooling families as well. So that's something we've done. In terms of the feedback, the metrics, early on, there was funding support to really get in the classroom and get those testimonials and measure the outcome. Now it's more qualitative in the feedback that we get from educators when we're in online forums with them, when we're at conferences. We're hoping to get some funding in the future to do a little more of a quantitative. But right now it's all very qualitative in the virtual spaces that we're a part of and the times that we're in person with teachers and getting that feedback and also using that feedback to develop future things. We're hearing from teachers that they'd really like resources for short films And we have some of that in our library, but not a ton. So a big goal for us moving forward as well is to develop resources for short films, because teachers are really interested in that in their classrooms. And so again, we're balancing, what we do, and we're adapting. 20 years is a long time. Education has changed a lot in 20 years. So
Yeah.
we need to adapt to those changes and to the shifting needs of educators.
Why do you believe teachers are more interested in short films nowadays? Or not more interested, but have more of an interest in short films these days?
Because they don't have as much time to bring it. It's really just the time pressures that educators are under. So it will be easier for them to bring a 10-minute film into their classroom, a 20-minute film into their classroom, versus a Hidden Figures or Summer of Soul or Navalny, a longer film. There's definitely value in those films, and teachers are certainly interested in them, but sometimes it's just hard to fit them in. And we've heard from teachers that sometimes they will use certain clips with our materials, say, oh, we are going to use these clips, or our guide for He Named Me Malala has a lesson that's specific to her Nobel Peace Prize speech. So sometimes the teachers are showing clips from the film, the Nobel Peace Prize speech Malala gave, and then using our materials because they just don't have time, unfortunately, for the feature film in the classroom. So it's a balance, and it varies so much from school to school. Some schools, teachers absolutely are using feature films in their classroom a lot still, and even more than ever. But some schools, there's a lot of pressure on the teachers to always be preparing for the test. So for those teachers that understand the power and importance of film, they're asking for short films. And so we want to be responsive to that. And media literacy is a huge topic for teachers now. So again, if they don't have as much time to bring in feature films, if we can provide them resources for short films and using those short films to teach media literacy and to introduce a topic and foster and spark creativity, then that's another role that we could play.
In what ways do you believe that teaching with film can foster empathy among students?
In lots of ways. I mean, I've seen it. In addition to working in education, I'm a filmmaker myself, or have been in the past. And so I've literally seen this happen at screenings of my films where people have said, I never thought about XYZ before. One of my films was a film about immigration. And we literally had people after the film say, I never thought about the person who cuts my lawn, because that's the person they know in their life that's an immigrant. It never occurred to me that they might have a family. And that kind of statement just blew me away. But they hadn't thought of this person beyond their job or their relationship to them. And then through watching a film, they see them as a full human. So I think that is what we've seen, is that you're in someone's story and they're more fully human to you. And so that builds empathy. You go, oh, maybe I need to think about this. Maybe I have some misconceptions about a group of people, or about someone from X country, or about XYZ, whatever it might be. So we have seen that happens. And like I said, with that film, Children of Heaven, we got that feedback from students that they were like, oh, just to have this story about these two Iranian siblings, it's like, I never thought of it before. Or with the film Unzipped, I mentioned, to see actually what the lives of unhoused people are like, and not just your minimal experience of it. And I've heard from educators as well, in bringing up that issue in their classroom, that in small classrooms with a lot of trust, they've had teachers have said, I've actually had students open up and share about their experience with housing. And then the students learn, like, hey, one of my classmates who comes to school, has food, looks fine, no reason for me to suggest, they've been couch surfing for the last year. They've been living in someone's garage, and so it gives people space sometimes, again, in safe spaces, in classrooms that have done that ability to build trust, to really open up and share in ways, because they're seeing examples on screen. They're seeing other people's stories. And that's part of our criteria too. We don't want a surface. We want a story that's powerful, that's meaningful, that goes deep into something, that gives you an opportunity to really see something through a new perspective, through a new lens, that maybe you weren't seeing it before.
Looking forward, what are some of the long-term goals and visions for Journeys in Film? Are there new subjects or themes that you're looking to explore?
Yes, something that we're adding, and this is again in response to teachers. So, one of our newer guides is for a film that's a little under an hour called The Neighborhood Storyteller about Syrian refugees. And we added a book element. So, we have a book that could pair well with that film. And we're hearing that from teachers that book pairings are helpful. So, that's something we're looking to add more of in the future is having a book that connects with the film. We know teachers are already doing that. We have a film in the library called Big Sonia, a documentary about a woman who was a teenager during the Holocaust. And we know that teachers are pairing that with Night by Elie Wiesel. And we know Just Mercy is often paired. Our resources for Just Mercy in that film are paired with To Kill a Mockingbird to kind of bring it up to date, because teachers are still teaching To Kill a Mockingbird, but they want to bring it forward. So we're looking at that now as we create materials, like what books could we pair with a film to make it another learning component. We're also hoping to add more Latino American films, LGBTQIA films, Muslim American films. We've been very global in nature and we will stay global, but something we're hearing from educators is that those mirrors back for their students would be nice to have. So we're looking at adding those to our library as well. So keeping a balance and keeping global education dominant, but also being mindful of the needs of the teachers we're talking with. So some of those stories that look at the global and the local connection, what is the big picture, what is local to our communities, and how can we be reflective of that? And then, of course, like I said, adding more short films to our library, that's something that we're looking at as well.
You mentioned earlier that homeschooling has become a big thing and it's bigger than ever and more diverse than ever. What challenges and opportunities do you see in this expansion?
So many. Actually, personally, my children now school from home, and that's
Okay.
something I never thought would be part of our lives. My partner and I didn't think it would be part of our lives, but during the pandemic, it was obviously virtual school. And then we found a virtual school that really worked for them, and they wanted to stay in that setting. And so they're schooling from home, and we see the value of that for our own kids. I think for Journeys, I think it's an important growth area. I think it is for anyone who services education, because we want all students to be included. We want resources for all students. So I think just, again, thinking about that in the creation of materials, how can something be approachable to a parent that is working a job and also schooling their child?
Yeah.
So having materials that they're like, oh, and also trusting that we have selected films that are appropriate. We're telling you this film is okay, this film is appropriate. And actually, in one of the years of the pandemic, I did use Journeys materials at home with my kids, and it was before I was working with Journeys, but I used The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. We watched it at home, and we used some of those materials to learn about Malawi and to learn about science. So I myself have done it, and I've seen the value of that. And also being a filmmaker and raising children, film has always been a part of how we've taught them and how they learn, just because it's natural for me. But I also see the impact on them and how it helps them to see the world and make their world bigger when you're in a limited setting. And I think that's something that's important too. Travel has been an important part of my life, but we don't all have the privilege to travel. And certainly in recent years, that's been more challenging for myself and my family. So you can't necessarily take your child to China, to Korea,
Yeah.
to New Zealand, but how can you help them learn about those areas? And I think, by curating films and sharing films on Journeys in Film that do that, parents can go, oh, I can help my child expand their worldview and see the world, even if we can't get to these places.
As a filmmaker and an executive at Journeys in Film, you must be incredibly busy. How does homeschooling affect your ability to perform as a mother, a wife, and as an executive and a filmmaker?
I am busy, but I think that balance is the key. And I'm a type of person that does better when I have multiple things that I can shift between. My kids do now. There was one year where we were mainly the teachers, my partner and I, and we were like, that we don't have the bandwidth for. We learned that the hard way, did the best we could. But now they're in a virtual school, and I'm very lucky that virtual school is working really well for them. So I don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting. And actually, in our case, it makes it easier because there's no school
Mm.
drop off, there's no pickup, so there's no commute time to and from
Ah,
school. Their school day starts a lot later. so they can get the rest that they need. They're able to sleep in when they need it, which is very helpful. They're 12 and 14, so they're growing a lot. That sleep really matters a lot for them. So in many ways, it makes it easier because there's less time spent driving kids around. A lot of parents I know, it's a good, part-time job just driving your parents around. And even with our kids' activities, there is still that, but there at least is not the school drop off and pick up. And I think they see their parents modeling work-life balance. They see their parents making a commitment to be creative, making a commitment to give back to others, artists, and to give back to educators, to improve the world, to make the world a better place. And I think them seeing that actively every day is a part of education as well, and is a part of modeling to them the type of people we want them to be, and also modeling to them when we make mistakes, when we fail, when we work on a project that doesn't land where we want to be. I also do creative writing, and I get a lot of rejections as a creative writer, but that's important for them to see as well, that we don't give up when we have challenges, that there are sometimes when you're running your own company or working with a small nonprofit, there's frustrations, but it's okay to model that and for them to see that and to see the way that you work through that. I think so. Embracing the challenge of it in terms of the transparency, I think that our children see in terms of how you live a life that allows you to follow your passions, even if that has some hard spots here and there.
Brilliant role model. I love that. That's really important for them to see. And I think that's great that you're doing so. And can you share insights into the process of creating the discussion guide for Matter of Mind, My Parkinson's? How did the collaboration with filmmakers, subjects, and medical experts shape that guide?
So I can't remember who referred us to the Independent Lens team at PBS, but we did get referred to them. And so this one was a little different because we have our format we use for discussion guides, but this one we were working with the Independent Lens format. They do pop-ups and educational things, so we had to match their format. So that was different for us, and we were introduced to them. So we met with the filmmakers. I think myself and the writing team, the writers I brought on for that guide, we had 2 or 3 meetings with those filmmakers virtually and with the team at Independent Lens to get clarity on what they were looking for and how the guide could meet their pop-up needs. We also, was like having a crash course in Parkinson's because we didn't know a lot about Parkinson's. And so that's one thing that's, sometimes we have writers that are experts in fields, but sometimes they're experts in creating guides, not necessarily in the field. So it's almost like doing a high-level graduate program course for a semester in a topic, as was the case with Parkinson's. So we were really learning a lot, watched the film several times, and go back and forth with, as I said, the film team and the Independent Lens team to get that guide where they wanted it, and really to think about how to have communities. So that guide is specific to communities that can open up and talk about Parkinson's, talk about neurodegenerative diseases, look at their community and say, what resources do we have? What resources are we lacking? How can we be more supportive of caregivers in our community and of people with these types of conditions? So that was a big part of that process, was really thinking about that outcome. Is what are the communities that use this film going to be doing, and how can we help them to really have that impact? Again, not just I learned about Parkinson's, but actually like now I have more understanding if I see someone displaying a Parkinson's type of symptom. For instance, we had someone say, oh, there was someone in my book club and I thought maybe they seemed drunk at book club and they were kind of concerned. And then they realized, oh, this person actually has Parkinson's. That's why they have a tremor. That's why they're speaking in this way. So just understanding that that's the power that these films and discussions guides can have, is something simple like that, where someone has a new understanding and then new empathy and new ability to be supportive of someone in their community that's dealing with something that they hadn't previously realized.
What was the situation like working with PBS? Was it something you enjoyed?
Yeah, it was really a positive experience. And 2 of our more recent guides that just went on our site are also films that have just become on PBS. So one is Greener Pastures, about rural America and dairy farmers and the mental health crisis they are facing. And then the other is The Invisible Shield, which is a docuseries about public health. So both of those are on PBS. With Invisible Shield, we worked primarily with the production company, but we also did work a little bit with PBS. So they were, signing off on our materials, looking at our materials, and we found it to be a really fruitful process. We're really excited about these new guides for these PBS films.
And for aspiring filmmakers wanting to contribute to educational media or educators looking to incorporate more visual storytelling into their classrooms, what advice would you offer?
I think for filmmakers, something that's really important to think about if you think the educational marketplace might be part of your film release is little things like those 2 F words. That could be something that's going to rule your film out of a classroom use. So do you need those in there? Can you bleep them out? If your film is in another language, we've seen this too. The person is cursing in the other language. What can you do with the subtitles to make it more classroom friendly? So little things like that. If you might have an educational outcome, thinking about keeping the film PG-13 or PG is going to expand your reach. If it really needs to be R, then that's another challenge and you can work around that. But in a lot of cases, there's probably, if it has some educational merit, there's probably a way you can keep it PG-13, or even PG, and that's going to expand your educational reach. I think also for filmmakers thinking outside of the box, sometimes we don't think of our film as educational where it might be. And I can say that for personal experience with my film Smuggled that Ramon Hamilton and I made. We didn't initially think about that. So it wasn't at our inception. At our inception, it was just to tell this powerful story of this mother and son that are being smuggled into the US that drew from personal stories that inspired us. But then when we were distributing the film, we realized that it could have powerful impact in education. And ours was mainly collegiate. So we did distribute collegiately and we did really well in that space, and seeing the power of that and seeing why. And it was really that students who were Latino were so excited to see stories that related to their community on screen. It's a bilingual film. And then also in the story I shared before, people opening their eyes to it. So, we screened one night at a campus and Fruitvale Station was screening in the opposite theater. And, we had a better turnout than Fruitvale Station. That's really exciting for a small independent filmmaker, low budget filmmaker.
Impressive.
And it's rare, you're not going to get that in a theatrical release. We didn't have a theatrical release, but you might get that in educational. So not looking down on it, but saying if a high school teacher probably teaches 100 students. So if you get that teacher excited about your film, that's now 100 students that have watched your film just from one teacher teaching your film. So seeing that can be a powerful way to reach people, to have your film have an audience and not to overlook it, I think is something that I would say to filmmakers. And I would say for teachers, look for quality resources like Journeys in Film, and there's some others. We match them up with core common standards. So you can say to your administrator or parents that might be saying, why are you teaching this in the classroom? You can say, it meets these standards. We match them up with the UN SDGs, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which some teachers are using now in their classrooms. So we try to match it with things that make it powerful for you to be able to justify its use, since we know teachers are under a lot of criticism. And also we know that students relate to stories, stories. Everybody relates to stories. I mean, all of the research shows data doesn't move people. Stories move people. So I can give you data about immigration. It's not going to impact you the way that telling one singular story of someone immigrating will impact you. So I think when a lot of educators are looking to inspire students, to engage students, as they say, you've got to reach before you teach. Starting with a powerful film can really do that reaching for you. It can help you do that reaching because it's a story, and stories pull us in, stories inspire us. And then you can come in with your data. Then you can come in with those academic, rigorous things you need to hit, but you've gripped them with the story. So I would say understanding the power of stories, and that students are saturated in media, and also helping them understand how to navigate the media they're saturated in through the use of film can be a really important thing to do for a student.
I completely agree. That was an amazing answer. I thank you for it. And how has your personal journey through film and education shaped your leadership at Journeys in Film? Are these experiences from your own life that inform your approach to the organization's mission?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the fact that for the last 20 years, I've either been making films or teaching film or teaching in other ways absolutely affects the way that I approach Journeys in Film and why I felt like it was a good fit. That's the other thing. I've only worked for myself until 2 years ago when I started to work with Journeys. I'd mainly only worked for myself for 18 years, but this felt like too good of a fit to pass up because it did really connect to things I care deeply about, which is filmmaking and education. But also, my first foray into education came while I was getting my master's degree, and it was in Middle Eastern Studies. And I actually literally was supposed to meet with my advisor on 9/11, 2001. So I saw very, very actively at that time the power of the media because people did not have enough stories about the Muslim community and the Arab community to handle that situation without a lot of hate. And I really saw firsthand what happens when we don't have enough representation for a certain community. And in my program, we met a lot, and it was to support each other because you had professors whose kids had only grown up in the US, but their heritage might have been Arab or Iranian, Persian. And those kids were being vilified at school, were being treated really terribly at school. And so, really seeing the importance of expanding people's views and the power of film, I started at that time through a program with my grad school, going into schools and saying, here are Muslim films you can use. Here are films about Arabs you can use that are not what they're used to seeing, which is, an Arab terrorist
Mm,
in whatever latest TV show there was, whatever latest movie. It didn't
yeah.
matter. You either have a Soviet or Russian terrorist or bad guy, or you have an Arab or Muslim bad guy. I mean, that was very much the action films of that time, right? So we were going into classrooms and saying, here are other options, telling teachers, here are other options, and showing them these beautiful films from the Arab world, from the Muslim world, that has a rich, dynamic history in filmmaking, and helping educators use that. And so that really stayed with me as I became a filmmaker. It stayed with me as I did work with youth. It stays with me now at Journeys, and is again part of why I was motivated to say, yeah, I'll work for someone else now. I'll work for this organization because I really believe in that power, and I really have seen it firsthand. And I think we have so much media and so many leaders, unfortunately, telling us to hate and telling us to be divided, that it's really important that those of us that have the background, the skills, the creative inkling, the passion, that we are making and creating and uplifting different stories and are really pushing back. We're never going to reach the saturation level, unfortunately, but we can push back. We can push back and we can create those stories, and they're going to make a difference for someone, and that's going to matter. And so just kind of understanding that and always just going, what can I do? What can I do to push back and to put a different story out there, or to uplift some other person's story, as with Journeys and selecting films and working with filmmakers and helping them see how their film can be used in the classroom or how it can be amplified. I think it's a very important thing. And also, I think having both backgrounds helps me when we are working with filmmakers, because I can understand
Mm.
their struggles as well as the educational side of it.
It's clear that you have passion and you care a lot about human rights, social issues, and education. Where do you think that comes from in you?
Well, I was raised by a teacher. So my mom was a public school teacher. So was my partner's mom. So I don't think
Oh,
that's an
okay.
accident. We're raised by
Yeah.
teachers. Also was raised by a preacher. And so I think service was just a part of something I grew up with. My parents both, were in service work, basically. So I grew up with that. But I think also a big part of it was the travel that I did when I was in undergrad. I went to Egypt, I studied abroad in Egypt. And I think that really was a part of it too, seeing the ways that I grew up in a small town in Texas. So kind of seeing the
Oh,
ways
okay.
that my limited understandings, given the media that was available to me, the things that were available to me did not serve me. And really seeing a broader world and meeting people from all over the world through a study abroad program and going, oh, there's a bigger world, and it's important to see that. But I think something about just my child, my sibling as well as a Tibetan Buddhist translator. So we both kind of
Wow.
do things that are service oriented and focused on, I think, this issue of supporting the world. And I think too, growing up in a town where I did see a lot of negative things around different communities, around class issues, around race, I think just lit something in me to go, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel, and going, especially being raised in a church and going, well, these teachings that I'm being told, like it's not matching up with. And I think often, we have a lot of fundamentalism in religion now, where a lot cross religions, I think those things are not matching up often because of the way religion is playing out now. But in my young mind, you make things black and white, which can be bad or good. But I think in my very young mind, it was kind of good because I was like, but very simple thinking of Jesus says to love everyone. I'm not seeing that, like very simple things. But then as you get older and you expand your worldview and you read more and you study, you go, oh, there's a deeper thing here. And you get into the human rights issues and get into the importance of social justice work that started maybe as a child with this very blanket understanding that is not actually helpful if you're an adult. You need that complexity, but it did sort of, I think, lead to initial questioning of the disparities that I was seeing around me and trying to make sense of them. And then if you have good mentors and teachers and experiences that can help you make sense of them, it helps you dive into that deeper work, I think.
Amazing. Jen, if I can call you Jen or Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Excellent answers. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm positive that the audience has learned a lot as well about journeys in film, yourself, and all the great things that you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Your questions were phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.